In this video, we're going to look at a real writing task 1 from a real student. I'm going to tell you what the student did well, what they can improve on for next time, and finally, at the end of the video, we will talk about the band scores. So let's get started and have a look at the question. The graph below shows average carbon dioxide CO2 emissions per person in certain countries between 1967 and 2007. Now, whenever you see something like this, always think about what tense it is. So this is obviously the past. That means when reporting or talking about this data, the student will need to use the past tense. Summarize, actually I'll put that in green, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Very important, main features. The main features, well, that just refers to the most important information. You do not have to talk about every single number. No, just the most important information. And also note here, it says make comparisons. Okay, compare different things. What was higher? What was lower? What was the highest? What was the lowest? Okay, you need to make comparisons. Now let's look at the chart itself. It looks pretty simple. It's a simple line chart. I can see straight away that there are some countries which had a downward trend. Okay, down, and this one here down, whereas the other two had an upward trend. So this should be a pretty simple chart here. The grouping could be the two countries which experience an upward trend and then a downward trend. When it comes to the overview, I think we could maybe just talk about the United Kingdom had the highest numbers, and then Portugal had the lowest numbers. All right, so now we've looked at the question itself, had a bit of a talk about it, a bit of a think about it. Let's look at the student's answer. All right, so here is the answer. We're going to go through it line by line, and we'll start with the introduction. So here we go. The line graph demonstrates the mean level. Okay, nice piece of vocab there, mean level of carbon dioxide emitted by individual. Okay, there's an issue there. What is the issue with this word here? Individual. Well, it should have an S at the end there, individuals, in various countries over a 40-year period. Well, this should be connected. It should be 40-year. Okay, there's no need for a space there. From 1967 to 2007. Okay, nice start. Nice paraphrase there to start off the answer. No major issues apart from just forgetting to have the S there. Let's continue. Overall, fantastic. It's very important to have an overall or an overview in your writing task 1 report because it's a requirement for a band 7 in task achievement. So let's have a look at what they say. Overall, it can be seen that a downward trend and an upward trend were observed. Okay, so some nice grammar and vocabulary. Okay, we've got the passive voice there. Okay, were observed. Very, very nice. In various countries throughout the period. So this is fine. This is great. The writer is saying we had a downward trend and an upward trend. But then the writer says in various countries. Well, what does that mean? Which ones went up? Which ones went down? Maybe they're going to say in the next sentence, I don't know, but we'll have to see. All right, let's keep going. While, okay, I meant to do the highlight there. While the average amount of carbon dioxide emitted in the UK declined slightly. Okay, fantastic. Now, something I like here is that the student is using some complex grammar. Okay, we've got while, then we've got a comma, and then we've got the second idea. Okay, this is a great structure to have. Okay, you have while plus idea 1, then you have the comma, and then you have the second idea. Nice grammar, nice vocab. Well done to the student. Let's keep reading. Sweden decreased dramatically. Okay, I'm not sure why they're focusing on UK and Sweden. Not sure there. And then he says, moreover, Italy and Portugal rose significantly. So a really nice overview. It's quite detailed. However, it could be better. So for example, they haven't talked about the highest figures and the lowest figures in this chart, but that's okay. Not the end of the world. There's still an overview there. All right, let's have a look at the body paragraph number 1 now. So beginning with the United Kingdom, okay, that looks like that's the topic sentence. It looks like maybe they're just going to talk about the UK here. The trend dropped gradually from approximately 11 metric tons to nearly 9 metric tons. Okay, a bit of repetition here. Sorry, let me put that in red. Okay, metric tons, metric tons. So it'd be nice if the student could remove that repetition. And then they say over the 4 decades. Okay, decade is a nice word there. It's an example of a less common piece of vocabulary because most people don't use this in their everyday lives. However, I do see an issue. The writer said the trend dropped. Well, the trend doesn't really drop. It's the number that drops. Trend is normally talking about start to finish. So I don't think that's the best word there. The better word would probably be maybe number or the figures. There could be a better word there. So that's a very small issue. Let's keep moving on. Then the writer says in contrast. Okay, nice linking there. However, whenever you're using words like this, okay, in contrast, moreover, furthermore, all these words that students like to use, I don't really like these words, by the way. They're an issue for coherence and cohesion if you use them in the wrong way. But if you are going to use them, you should try to use them in the middle or after a few words. So what I mean by that is, when we say in contrast, we could put in contrast here. We could say Sweden, in contrast, went up sharply. That will be much more professional and it would show a higher level of grammar because anyone can just write in contrast, comma, dot, dot, dot. But it's much harder to put in contrast in the middle of a sentence or after a few words. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The next thing I've noticed is that they say Sweden went up sharply. Well, Sweden didn't go up. Okay, Sweden is a country. Sweden, let's pretend this is Sweden. Sweden didn't go up. Okay, it's still at the same level. So they need to say something like the numbers for Sweden, the figures for Sweden. Or they could say something like Sweden's figures went up. Now, just going back to that word or that phrase, went up, there are so many better words or phrases we could use instead of went up. We could say rose, we could say increased, we could say climbed. Okay, there are many different better words we could use there. Okay, let's continue. So went up sharply, around 8 metric tons. So I think the writer is missing the word from. I'm not sure. From around 8 metric tons to nearly 11 metric tons. And again, there's a lot of repetition here, metric tons. So this is an issue. And if we just read ahead quickly, we've got metric tons again. So the writer should try to think about how they can reduce the amount of repetition that they have in their answer. Nevertheless, let's continue. Which was the peak in the first decade? Okay, fantastic. We've got a bit of comparison. Okay, peak in the first decade. Remember that the question itself asked for comparisons. Okay, it said make comparisons where relevant, and we're doing that by talking about the peak, okay, the highest number. All right, let's continue. So the writer says, after that, actually, I might just change to this, might be easier. After that, Sweden plunged. Okay, nice piece of vocabulary there. Plunged. A plunge or plunged means a big drop. Okay, so something like this, really big drop. Let's continue. Plunge substantially. Also another nice word. I'll highlight that as well. Substantially. Sorry, where's my highlighter? However, there's a bit of an issue because plunged already means a big drop. Substantially is saying a lot. So substantially is not really needed here because we've already used a word which describes a big drop. Okay, so substantially, not really needed there, but again, not the end of the world. Let's keep going to around 5 metric tons in 2007, which was nice grammar. The writer is showing the ability to use a range of complex sentences, which was the same level as Portugal. Fantastic. We've got some comparisons there, same level. So overall, the paragraph is okay. There's a topic sentence, there's some comparisons, there's some nice vocab, nice grammar, but there's a little bit of repetition and a few other small issues which we just discussed. Let's continue. Moving to the Italy and Portugal. Well, this looks like a topic sentence, so that's fantastic. Let's put a tick there. However, there is one grammar mistake. Quickly pause the video. Where is the grammar mistake? Well, it's right here. Okay, the. When we're talking about a country, we do not need the. Okay, so just say moving to Italy and Portugal. Dot, dot, dot. Another issue I see is right here. This I. Okay, it should be a small I. After you have a... Sorry, where's that gone? Sorry. After you have a comma, you normally need a small letter unless you've got a proper noun. For example, the name of a country. Let's continue reading here. The mean level, okay, nice one, of Italy started at over 4 metric tons. Okay, we've got a little bit of that repetition again. While Portugal started at approximately 1 metric ton, which was the lowest point. Nice, okay, nice grammar, which, and then lowest point, some nice comparisons. Now, moving on to that the next sentence, I already see an issue. Pause the video. What is the issue? Well, I hope you said this should be a capital T. Then, over a 40-year period, well, there's also another mistake here. We shouldn't say we should say the. We should say the because we know which 40-year period. Okay, we know that we're talking about the 40-year period in the actual graph or chart that we're looking at. Okay, let's continue. Over the 40-year period, Italy increased considerably. Again, it's not Italy, sorry, that's the wrong color. It's an issue. It's not Italy that increased, it's Italy's numbers. Like we talked about, Italy is a country. Italy doesn't increase, okay? It just stays the same. It's the numbers. For example, Italy's population increased. Italy's GDP increased, okay? We need to have something specific there. Considerably, nice word, to just under 8 metric tons, while Portugal, nice grammar, Portugal grew sharply, nice vocabulary, to approximately 5 metric tons by the end of the period, which again, very, very nice, which was the same level. There's that comparison as Sweden. So a nice body paragraph again, but just a few small issues here and there. So let's move on to the final scores. Let's start with task achievement. So this is all about, did they talk about the main features? Did they make comparisons? Did they have an overview? Well, I think they did do all of that, and I think they did it quite well. They seemed to cover a lot of the numbers. They made some comparisons. They had a good overview. So I think this is probably going to be a 7 for task achievement. Now, moving on to coherence and cohesion. This is all about how easy it is to follow and how easy it is to read. And if there's a lot of linking and joining and everything being connected. And when I'm looking at it, I don't really see anything special about it. You know, it's okay. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong with it. But I just don't see anything that is good about the linking here and how easy it is to follow. And there are a lot of mechanical linking words. So for example, moreover, sorry, let me change this to maybe blue so you can see it. So moreover is one. In contrast, we talked about that. After that, okay, so lots of sort of mechanical linking here. I think there was another one. Oh no, they were the main ones. So yeah, because of that, there's nothing really special about the linking. I'm going to award a 6 for coherence and cohesion. Sorry. Now, moving on to lexical resource, we've talked about this. The writer had quite a lot of nice vocabulary: mean, decade, plunge, sharply. So they're clearly showing that they can use some less common vocab. And that is one of the main things you need to do for a band 7 in lexical resource. Because of that, I'm going to award a 7 for lexical resource. When it comes to grammar, there were some mistakes, but none of those mistakes impacted my ability to understand. And also, they were quite small, nothing major. And moving on to the range, okay, the range of grammar, how much grammar there was. Well, there were some shorter sentences, there were some longer sentences. You know, the writer used while, so that's a complex sentence. The writer used which, so there's a lot of nice grammar here, but just a few mistakes. So because of that, I'm going to award a 7 for the grammatical range and accuracy. So that means the overall band score there would be a 6.5. So they're very, very close to a 7. I think to make sure they get a 7 next time, they really need to focus on their coherence and cohesion and try to make things join together in a nicer way. So what I mean by that is, just pretend you're talking about the highest figure. Okay, you're talking about this highest figure here. And then you talk about a lower figure. Well, what you could say is something like this: with a much lower figure, comma, dot, dot, dot. This is a really nice way to link things together. And it's also making a comparison at the same time. Okay, a lower figure. So I think we'll leave it there for today. Nice writing by our student, but for next time, they should focus on their coherence and cohesion.